Thank you so much for coming, guys. Welcome to our second sci-fi night with Dr. Veith, second lecture with Dr. Veith. Just three quick announcements, actually, before we begin. We will be encouraging questions. Please go ahead and use these little cards to write your questions down, and we'll go ahead and collect those after the lecture. We'll have about an hour or more of lecture, and then a good portion of question and answers. We'll also take verbal questions as well. So be thinking of those as Dr. Veith gives his presentation. Those of you here receiving credit, we have these little cards. Now, these little cards will be picked up at the end of the session by one of our officers, and you'll see them in the back. And last but not least, on your way out, please get refreshments. And we'll enjoy those, please. All right, so we have Dr. Veith, and for those of you who weren't here yesterday, he spoke, his lecture title was Creation to Restoration, and we are enlightened to have that. And for those of you actually who don't even, how many don't know who Dr. Veith is? Okay, Dr. Veith doesn't really need an introduction, but I will give him one anyway. He's a world-renowned lecturer, evangelist. He speaks a lot on Bible prophecy as well. I know a lot of you are interested in that. But he's known for his authorship in many books as well. And so we encourage questions. I don't know if we have title. But anyway, thanks so much, guys, for being here. Yeah. Sorry about that. No title. Okay. Doesn't need a title, I assure you. This gentleman, thank you so much, Dr. Veith, and please, if you need anything, let us know.
I said it's nice to see young faces and young minds that grapple with the issues of faith and science. Now, most of you didn't put up your hands, so I assume most of you know who I am and what I believe. And everybody is happy to see me, either when I come or when I go. It's true, isn't it? Yes. And I've had lots of experience with students and the evolution question, and even religious students and the evolution question. And it's always the same thing. Some get very angry, some get very antagonistic, some stay friendly but skeptical, and some believe. That's the nature of man. That's the beauty of the freedom of choice. And if God was willing to die for freedom of choice, who are we to curtail it? Now, I was an atheist most of my life. I told yesterday a little bit of why I was an atheist. And I said I was an atheist because of a wrong concept of God. And that wrong concept of God came with the compliments of the theologians. So theologians are not always people who would put a very good spin on the character and the concepts of God. So I was an atheist. I was an antagonistic atheist, an aggressive atheist, roughly like Richard Dawkins. And I couldn't stand God, and even less could I understand or even conceive all the morons who believed in him. One of my favorite pastimes was to stand in front of the television and watch religious programs and laugh like a drain at all these idiots with their crutch called Christianity. And I was in a university which was a religious university when it was conceived as all universities practically on the planet. They all started out as religious institutes. Oxford, Cambridge, they were all religious institutes. and then later became the enemies of religion. I certainly hope it wouldn't happen to you. But it can happen. It can happen. And then in my university, it started off as a Calvinist university, Stellenbosch University, very famous university in southern Africa, with very strong ties and sister relationships and exchange relationships with Tübingen University. And Tübingen University is, of course, the European university which is involved in the evolution paradigm. So everything at my university was evolutionary steeped, with distorters, scientists such as Haeckel, for example, and the Castrea theory, and all of these as the basis for the evolutionary theory. You know, all these things work beautifully on an anatomical level. They work fantastically. And so in comparative anatomy, you study how all these organisms on the planet arose, how a single-celled organism eventually, through clumping, became a morea, a multi-celled organism. And then over periods of time, how this multi-celled organism became a blasteia, a little ball of cells. And then eventually a gastrea when it developed an indentation. And eventually the indentation went right through this little ball of cell, and then you had the basis for all other organisms. You know that you are a ball of cells with a hole all the way through, don't you? You are, to this very day. The one orifice happens to be this one. And the other one is hidden. Sometimes, at least. So that's what you are. And out of this multicellular arrangement, eventually all the various life forms developed. And it looks so logical, and it looks so nice, unless you discuss it or study it on the genetic level, then it becomes a nightmare. Because how did a multicellular organism arise that consisted of differentiated different cells? It's easy to clump cells together, and then they'll all be the same cells. And if you multiply them, they'll all have the same genetic material, they'll all be the same cells. But how did a multicellular organism come about? With different cells and different activations and deactivations of gene patterns and inductions and embryological developments and all of these intricacies, where if something goes wrong, the whole thing collapses. It is incredibly complicated. And so science had to develop the intricate discipline of embryology. Who studied embryology here? You've studied embryology? Induction, does it do something for you? Induction is the chemical process whereby cells in the embryology, as the cells migrate and develop, as the embryo develops, certain cells produce certain chemical compounds which activate certain gene patterns in adjacent cells. So otherwise you'd be one big liver. No. You only develop the liver in one spot, and the kidney in another spot, and the heart in another spot, and the brain in another spot, and a this in another spot, and a that in another spot. And everything happens in that same gene pattern, and it's all induction and chemical stimulation and activation and deactivation of gene patterns and masking and holding and mega complicated stuff. How did it all come into existence? How did all that develop? It is absolutely mind-boggling. And so you have all these questions, but there is no God. You're an atheist. You don't need a God. And so you have to say, well, it must have taken a long time. And then you hide behind all these long ages in order to eradicate these thoughts out of your mind. Now, if you are an atheist, that means there is no God. But everybody knows that there is evil, because you just have to switch your television on and you will find out that there is evil. Have you noticed that? Yes. Now, if you come from an esoteric background, or if you are married into a family from an esoteric background, evil may even become personified. And that was the situation in my life. My wife and I, we had evil personified in our home. But we were atheists. And we didn't believe in God. As I said, I detested God. And you know what I detested even more? When I was a young student, I was in the student residences. That's where I lived. And I lived with the theology students. And they were the wildest students on the campus. They're the ones that thought we only have a very short window of opportunity to let our hair down, and then we have to put on a sanctimonious face forever and ever until the end of our lives, so let's lap it up. So they were the whoremongers and the drinkers and the carousers and you name it, they did it. In the week. But not on Sunday. Then they shoved that book under their arm, the one that's got the leather covering, shove it under their arm, put on a sanctimonious face and go off to church. And I used to look at these guys and I say, what a bunch of creepy hypocrites they are. Why don't they stand for what they stand? If they want to do all these things, then at least call it by its right name. Why be a hypocrite? I hated religion. I hated God. I couldn't stand it. That's me. And then I had this evil in my home. But an evil that was tantamount, that was touchable, that was tangible, that you couldn't get rid of by logical thinking processes. Because what happens if you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning with a nightmare that you're being strangled, and your baby in the next room, in the next second, screams its head off, and then goes into fever cramps, then stops breathing. You rush it to hospital, they battle to save its life. And then you bring it back home, and you go back to your normal life, and 3 weeks later, exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, you have the same dream, and the same thing happens to your child. And 3 weeks later, 2 o'clock in the morning, you have the same thing, and the same thing happens to your child. Don't you sooner or later reach laws of probability which are beyond mathematical computation, and then you say, there is a thing called evil. And that's what happened to us. You can check it out in the medical registers. The files of my kid are this high. I don't know how often it happened, but many, many times. And so, when you reach the end of your logical, scientific paradigm thinking, then you turn to something else. I turned to the church I didn't believe in, the church that I despised, the church that I won't go to all the adjectives. Let's leave it there. And I went and fetched that Roman Catholic priest into my home. And this Roman Catholic priest told me exactly what my life was all about, what the problem was, before I told him. And I said to him, excuse me, I have a problem now. How do you know what's been happening in my home if I haven't told you?